The rooftop terrace of the Metropolitan Club sparkled in the morning sunlight, its panoramic view of the city's financial district providing the perfect backdrop for Mom's 58th birthday celebration. White linens covered round tables adorned with pink peonies and roses, while servers in crisp uniforms moved gracefully between the 40 distinguished guests who'd gathered to honor Margaret Thompson's special day. This was exactly the kind of elegant brunch that Mom had perfected over the years. Intimate enough to feel exclusive, sophisticated enough to impress, and strategically planned to bring together the most influential women in our social circle. Bank presidents' wives mingled with hospital board members, prominent attorneys chatted with successful business owners, and the kind of old money families who appeared in society magazines raised mimosa glasses in celebration. And there I was, sitting at the family table in my department store blazer, feeling like I'd accidentally wandered into someone else's life. "Olivia, darling." Mom's voice carried across the terrace with the practiced warmth she used for her most important social events. Margaret Thompson approached me with her signature smile, the one that graced charity program covers and museum gala photos, radiant and perfectly calculated. At 58, Mom was still stunning in the way that only came from unlimited resources and meticulous self-care. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Her pearl jewelry was museum quality, and her hair had been styled by the same team that prepared local news anchors for television appearances. "There you are, sweetheart," she said, embracing me carefully to avoid disturbing her makeup. "I was just telling Mrs. Patterson about your little investment hobby." The way she said "little investment hobby" made it sound like I collected stamps or painted watercolors in my spare time. Mrs. Patterson, the wife of the city's most successful commercial real estate developer, turned toward me with polite interest. She was wearing what I recognized as this season's Oscar de la Renta. Probably $8,000 worth of designer sophistication that she'd purchased without checking the price tag. "How interesting, dear," Mrs. Patterson said with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for discussing someone's volunteer work at the animal shelter. "Margaret tells me you've been dabbling in financial investments. Such a practical skill for young women to develop." Before I could respond, Mom launched into her carefully rehearsed explanation. "Olivia's been learning about stocks and bonds, maybe some mutual funds. You know how important it is for unmarried women to understand personal finance. She's been very diligent about researching different investment options." The way she described it made me sound like someone taking a community college course on basic financial planning rather than someone who'd been building a sophisticated investment portfolio for the past 7 years. "How wonderful," Mrs. Patterson nodded approvingly. "And are you working with one of the established investment firms downtown?" "Patterson Development has excellent relationships with several wealth management companies." "I work independently," I replied carefully. "Oh, like one of those online trading platforms?" Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she was trying to be supportive about what was obviously a modest beginning in personal finance management. "Something like that," I said neutrally. Mom's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd coached me extensively on how to discuss my work at events like this, emphasize the learning experience, downplay any significant financial success, and never mention specific investments or returns that might make their wealthy friends uncomfortable. According to Mom, discussing actual investment performance at elegant social gatherings was inappropriate. Better to present my work as responsible personal finance education that would eventually prepare me for the more important business of finding a suitable husband who could provide proper financial security. "Well," Mrs. Patterson said with finality, "I'm sure you're learning valuable lessons about money management. Those skills will serve you well when you marry someone who can provide the kind of lifestyle your family background suggests you deserve." The implication was clear. What I was doing now was practice for the real financial security that would come through marriage to someone from an appropriate family. Mom nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased with how the conversation was being framed. "That's exactly what we've told her. Olivia's always been very analytical. But she's learning that there's more to life than just numbers and charts. Relationships, family connections, social responsibilities, these things matter more than portfolio returns." I excused myself and walked toward the mimosa station, needing some distance from conversations about my apparently temporary phase of financial independence. The bartender, a professional I'd seen at countless high society events, smiled as he prepared my drink. "How are you enjoying the party?" "It's lovely," I replied honestly. Mom had impeccable taste when it came to event planning and execution. Your mother certainly knows how to bring people together, he observed, gesturing around the elegant terrace. I've worked a lot of these society brunches, but this one has a special energy. She's very talented at creating the right atmosphere. I agreed, though my relationship with these social gatherings was more complicated than he could understand. Before I could elaborate, I spotted my stepfather making his way through the crowd toward me. Richard Thompson commanded respect wherever he went. At 6'1" with distinguished gray hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades in investment banking, he represented exactly the kind of financial success that our social circle valued most. Olivia. Richard's voice carried the warmth he used for important client relationships and board meetings. There's my stepdaughter. How are you finding your mother's celebration? Everything's beautiful, I replied sincerely. She's outdone herself with the planning. She certainly has. 58 years deserves a proper celebration, especially when those years have been as productive as your mother's. He gestured around the opulent terrace setting. Speaking of productivity, Margaret mentioned you've been exploring investment strategies. Following in the family footsteps, you might say. Richard had always been supportive of my interests, even when Mom's concern about my unmarried status was obvious. He'd married into our family when I was 19, bringing financial stability and social connections that had elevated our position considerably. I wouldn't say I'm following in anyone's footsteps exactly, I said carefully. While you're both interested in building financial security and understanding market dynamics, that's certainly something you have in common. He lowered his voice slightly. Between you and me, your mother is worried that you're getting too focused on investment research and not enough on the social connections that lead to appropriate marriage prospects. I'd heard this concern before. The gentle suggestion that my financial interests were distracting me from the more important business of finding a husband who could provide the lifestyle Mom thought I deserved. I understand her concerns, I said. She loves you, Olivia. We both do. But sometimes love means encouraging someone to balance personal interests with practical relationship goals. My phone buzzed with a text from David Martinez, my portfolio manager at Goldman Sachs. Thompson Holdings' Q3 results exceeded projections by 23%. Total portfolio value now $847 million. The tech sector acquisitions are performing exceptionally well. Congratulations on another record quarter. I quickly silenced my phone and slipped it back into my purse, but not before Richard noticed the interruption. Investment update? He asked with gentle amusement. Just some quarterly reports. Ah, well, it's good that you're staying current with market news, even if it's still in the learning phases. Shows dedication to understanding how finance really works. Before I could respond, Mom's voice rang out across the terrace, calling everyone's attention for what appeared to be a birthday speech. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced from beside the elaborate flower arrangement that served as the focal point of the main table, I want to thank you all for being here today to celebrate with me. Polite applause filled the morning air. 58 years feels like both a lifetime and just the beginning, she continued, her voice carrying perfectly across the terrace. I've been blessed with love, friendship, and the opportunity to be part of this wonderful community. More applause, warmer this time. But most importantly, Mom said, her tone becoming more personal, I've been blessed with family. My husband Richard has brought stability and joy to my life in ways I never imagined possible. Richard smiled warmly from where he stood near the edge of the gathering. And my daughter Olivia represents the next generation of Thompson women, though she's still finding her place in our social circle, Mom continued, her eyes finding mine across the terrace. I felt heat creep up my neck as 40 successful, socially prominent people turned their attention toward me. Olivia has been exploring various interests, investment research, financial analysis, that sort of thing, which shows wonderful intellectual curiosity, even if it's not quite the path we might have expected for someone from our family. The gentle disapproval in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. However, Mom's voice gained confidence as she delivered what was clearly a carefully planned message. I'm confident that she'll soon realize that true fulfillment comes not from studying market trends, but from building meaningful relationships and contributing to our community in more traditional ways. Around the terrace, I could see people nodding approvingly at this hope that the Thompson daughter would eventually settle into more appropriate social expectations. After all, Mom concluded, family legacy isn't about individual achievement. It's about each generation contributing to the social fabric that makes our community so special. The applause that followed felt like a polite endorsement of traditional values and appropriate life choices for wealthy young women. As people began returning to their conversations, I found myself standing alone near the terrace railing, looking out over the city's financial district while processing what had just happened. Mom had essentially used her birthday speech to publicly express disappointment in my life choices while expressing hope that I would eventually conform to more traditional expectations. "Difficult position to be in," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Caroline Martinez, a woman about my age whose husband ran one of the city's most successful medical practices. She was one of the few people at this gathering who wasn't old enough to be my mother. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Being the unmarried daughter at these events. Everyone's always got opinions about what you should be doing differently." She gestured around the terrace with a wry smile. "Trust me, I remember. Before I married David, every social gathering included someone's helpful suggestions about my career focus and relationship priorities. It's challenging," I admitted. "The irony is that most of these women built their security by marrying well rather than developing their own financial independence. So they can't really understand why someone would choose a different path." Before I could respond, I noticed a commotion near the main entrance to the terrace. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit was making his way through the crowd, clearly searching for someone specific. "That's interesting," Caroline murmured. "Isn't that William Chen from Metropolitan Bank?" I looked more closely at the approaching figure and felt my stomach tighten. William Chen was indeed the senior vice president at Metropolitan Bank, and someone who definitely shouldn't be recognizing me at my mother's birthday brunch. "Excuse me," I said to Caroline, trying to move away from where Chen was heading. But it was too late. He'd spotted me and was approaching with the kind of professional enthusiasm that banking executives reserved for their most important clients. "Miss Thompson." Chen's voice carried across the nearby conversations with obvious delight. "What a wonderful surprise to see you here. I had no idea you'd be at this lovely celebration." The conversations around us began to pause as people noticed the bank executive's approach and his clear focus on me. "Mr. Chen," I said quietly, hoping to keep this interaction brief and discreet. "How nice to see you." "The pleasure is entirely mine," he replied warmly. "I was just thinking about you yesterday when we reviewed the quarterly reports. How is the new acquisition performing? The Richardson Industries purchase was brilliantly timed. Your instincts about the manufacturing sector were absolutely correct." I could feel the attention of nearby guests focusing on our conversation, including Mom, who was standing close enough to hear every word. "It's going well," I replied neutrally, hoping he would take the hint and keep the details vague. "Well, Miss Thompson, it's exceeded every projection we discussed. Richardson Industries has increased in value by 47% since the acquisition, and the synergies with your other manufacturing holdings have been extraordinary." Mom had moved closer now, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to something that looked like confusion. "I'm sorry," she interrupted with her hostess smile, "but I think there might be some confusion. Olivia is my daughter and she's been learning about basic investment strategies, but I'm not sure what acquisition you're referring to." Chin looked genuinely puzzled. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm talking about your daughter's purchase of Richardson Industries for $137 million. One of the most sophisticated manufacturing acquisitions we've handled this year." The words seemed to echo across the terrace as nearby conversations stopped entirely. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "The Richardson Industries acquisition," Chin repeated, clearly sensing that something was wrong but not understanding what. "Thompson Holdings completed the purchase 3 months ago. It was quite impressive. Your daughter identified an undervalued company, structured a complex financing arrangement, and executed the acquisition flawlessly." Dad had appeared at Mom's side now, drawn by the obviously intense nature of this conversation. "I think there's been some mistake," he said diplomatically. "Mr. Chen, our daughter Olivia has been exploring personal investment strategies, but she's certainly not involved in $100 million acquisitions." Chen was looking between my parents and me with growing bewilderment. "Thompson Holdings is your investment company, isn't it, Ms. Thompson? We've been working together for 3 years now." The terrace had gone completely quiet as 40 guests realized they were witnessing something far more dramatic than typical birthday brunch conversation. 3 years. Mom repeated weakly. Since you were 26, Chin confirmed, pulling out his phone to check something. Your first major transaction was the acquisition of data flow systems for $63 million. Then the Sterling manufacturing purchase, the biotech investments, the real estate portfolio expansion. Each item he mentioned seemed to hit my parents like a physical blow. Mr. Chin, I said quietly, perhaps we could discuss this privately. Of course, but I just wanted to congratulate you on the portfolio performance. $847 million in total assets under management, with returns averaging 23% annually over 3 years. It's exactly the kind of sophisticated investment strategy that Metropolitan Bank is proud to support. The number, $847 million, seemed to ripple through the crowd of onlookers like a shockwave. Mom's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the terrace floor, the sound seeming to break the spell that had fallen over the gathering. $847 million, she repeated numbly. Give or take a few million depending on market fluctuations, Chin replied cheerfully. Though with the tech sector performing so well, I wouldn't be surprised if we're approaching $900 million by year-end. Richard was staring at me like I was a complete stranger. Olivia, what is he talking about? Instead of answering, I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder of documents I'd been carrying, quarterly investment reports, acquisition summaries, and portfolio performance analysis that I'd planned to review after the brunch. I handed the folder to Mom, watching her face as she opened it and began reading the summary page. Thompson Holdings LC, she read aloud. Total assets under management, $847,362,000. Year-to-date return, 28.3%. Portfolio includes controlling interests in 17 companies across 6 industry sectors. Her voice grew weaker with each number. 17 companies? Richard asked faintly. Manufacturing, technology, healthcare, real estate, financial services, and renewable energy, I replied calmly. Chin was nodding enthusiastically. Your daughter has built one of the most diversified investment portfolios I've ever managed. The strategic vision required to identify undervalued companies across multiple sectors, then execute acquisitions that create synergistic value. It's exactly the kind of sophisticated thinking that most investment firms struggle to develop. Around the terrace, 40 of the most financially sophisticated people in our community were staring at me with expressions ranging from bewilderment to something that might have been awe. But Olivia, Mrs. Patterson said weakly, you said you worked independently. You said it was like an online trading platform. I do work independently. Thompson Holdings is my company. And while I don't use online trading platforms, I do manage my investments through electronic systems and digital analysis tools. The technical truth of my earlier statements was starting to sink in. You own 17 companies? Dr. Martinez's wife asked, her voice barely audible. Controlling interests in 17 companies, minority stakes in about 30 others, and a real estate portfolio that includes commercial properties in 4 states. Each detail seemed to make the scope of my success more real and more impossible to ignore. Chin was still beaming with professional pride. Ms. Thompson, I hope you don't mind me mentioning the portfolio performance in front of your family. I know you prefer to keep things discreet, but achievements like this deserve recognition. Discreet. Mom found her voice again. Your daughter has been remarkably private about her success, Chin explained. Most clients with portfolios this size want recognition, media coverage, speaking engagements. But Ms. Thompson has insisted on complete confidentiality. We don't even list Thompson Holdings in our client success stories, per her specific request. Mom was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time. You've been hiding this from us. I haven't been hiding anything, I replied calmly. You asked what I did for work. I told you I researched investments and managed financial assets. You assumed that meant I was learning about personal finance on a small scale, so I didn't correct that assumption. But $847 million, Richard said weakly. Olivia, that's not personal finance. That's institutional-level wealth management, Chin supplied helpfully. Your daughter is operating at a level that most professional investment firms aspire to reach. The reality of what they were learning was starting to settle over the terrace like a heavy blanket. Why? Mom's voice was plaintive. Why didn't you tell us what you were really accomplishing? I looked around at the faces surrounding me. Women who had spent the morning treating me like someone who needed their patience while I figured out how to be successful like them. Because I wanted to see if you could be proud of me when you thought I was unsuccessful. The words landed like a challenge. We are proud of you, Mom protested automatically. We've always been proud of you. Have you? Because 10 minutes ago, you used your birthday speech to express hope that I would give up my financial interests and focus on finding a husband instead. Mom flinched like I'd slapped her. You said that true fulfillment comes from building relationships rather than studying market trends. You said that family legacy is about contributing to social fabric rather than individual achievement. The accuracy of this recollection was written across her face. But the irony, I continued, is that while you were hoping I'd stop focusing on numbers and charts, those numbers and charts were making me more successful than anyone at this table had ever imagined. Chin was nodding approvingly. The analytical skills required to identify undervalued assets across multiple market sectors, then execute complex acquisition strategies that create sustainable value. It's exactly the kind of financial acumen that our economy needs more of. Furthermore, I said, looking directly at Mom, while you were worried that my investment interests were preventing me from contributing to our community, Thompson Holdings has created over 4,000 jobs across the companies we've acquired and improved. The number seemed to stun everyone into silence. 4,000 jobs? Mrs. Patterson repeated. 4,137 as of last month. Plus the indirect employment created through our suppliers, contractors and business partners. Olivia, Mom said quietly, I owe you an enormous apology. We owe you an apology. For what specifically? For not seeing what you were building. For treating you like you were wasting your time when you were actually achieving something extraordinary. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Mom, you didn't just fail to see my success. You were actively embarrassed by what you thought was my failure to conform to appropriate social expectations. You spent this entire brunch hoping I would give up my work and focus on finding a husband instead. I was wrong, she whispered. I was so completely wrong. You were wrong about my work, but you were also wrong about what success looks like. You assumed that because I wasn't married or socially prominent in traditional ways, I wasn't building anything meaningful. I gestured around the terrace at the other guests, all of whom were still processing what they'd learned. Every woman here has achieved financial security through marriage to successful men. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly valid life choice. But you couldn't imagine that someone might choose a different path to the same destination. The distinction was starting to sink in around the terrace. When you look at Mrs. Patterson's lifestyle, you're seeing Patterson Development's success. When you look at my lifestyle, you're seeing mine. Chin was checking something on his phone. Speaking of success, Ms. Thompson, I should mention that the Meridian Biotech acquisition you've been considering looks even more attractive this week. The FDA approval they just received increases the company's value by at least 30%. Thank you for the update, I said. We can discuss the details on Monday. Meridian Biotech, Richard repeated slowly. How much is that acquisition? $215 million, Chin replied before I could stop him. It would be the largest single transaction in Thompson Holdings history. The number seemed to echo across the now silent terrace. $215 million, Mom said faintly. For one company. It's a strategic acquisition that fits perfectly with our existing healthcare portfolio, I explained. The synergies with our medical device and pharmaceutical holdings should create significant value. You have medical device holdings? Dr. Martinez's wife asked. Thompson Holdings owns controlling interests in 3 medical device companies, 2 pharmaceutical research firms, and a healthcare data analytics company. Each revelation seemed to make the scope of my business empire more real and more impressive. The healthcare portfolio alone is worth over $200 million, Chin added helpfully. Your daughter has essentially built a diversified medical investment company while also developing successful strategies in manufacturing, technology, and real estate. Mom was looking through more documents from the folder I'd given her, her face growing paler with each page. Olivia, this says you employ over 4,000 people across 17 companies. 4,137 direct employees, plus approximately 12,000 indirect jobs through our suppliers and contractors. You've created 12,000 jobs? Thompson Holdings has created those jobs by providing capital and strategic guidance to companies that needed resources to expand their operations. The scope of what I was describing was starting to overwhelm everyone present. Chin checked his watch. Miss Thompson, I should let you get back to celebrating your mother's birthday, but I did want to mention that Forbes has been asking about interviewing you for their Youngest Self-Made Women feature. I'm not ready for that kind of publicity, I said quickly. I understand, but your story is exactly the kind of entrepreneurial success that inspires other young women. Building an $800 million investment portfolio by age 29, creating thousands of jobs, revolutionizing how regional companies access growth capital. It's extraordinary. Mom was crying now, her perfect makeup starting to streak down her cheeks. Olivia, I'm so ashamed of how I've treated you. I don't want you to be ashamed. I want you to understand that success comes in many different forms, and just because someone's achievements don't look traditional doesn't mean they're not meaningful. But I was so worried about you, she protested. You seemed so focused on work, so uninterested in the social connections that lead to marriage and family. I was focused on work because I was building something important. And I wasn't uninterested in social connections. I was uninterested in social connections that were based on false assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of achieving. Richard stepped forward, his expression a mixture of amazement and regret. Olivia, what you've accomplished is extraordinary. $847 million in assets, 17 companies, thousands of employees. You've built something that most professional investors could never achieve. And you did it while we were offering you advice about personal finance and relationship priorities. Mom added, her voice thick with regret. I looked at these two people who had shaped so much of my adult life, who had driven me to succeed partly to earn their approval and partly to prove I didn't need it. The saddest part, I said, is that you've been living off the success of Thompson Holdings for the past 2 years without knowing it. Both of them stared at me in confusion. The country club membership that you couldn't quite afford after Richard's retirement? Thompson Holdings owns the club and comped your membership. The medical expenses from Mom's surgery last year that insurance didn't cover? Our healthcare portfolio includes the company that manufactured her medical devices. They donated the equipment. The lucky stock picks that have been funding your lifestyle improvements? Those were Thompson Holdings positions that I made sure got added to your personal portfolio. The revelation seemed to stun them both into silence. While you were worrying about my financial future, I was securing yours. Chin was nodding approvingly. Family support through strategic business positioning. It's exactly the kind of thoughtful wealth management that separates sophisticated investors from simple profit seekers. The brunch was essentially over now, with 40 guests standing around in various states of shock as they processed what they'd witnessed. The birthday celebration had transformed into something entirely different, a revelation that changed everything they thought they knew about success, family, and the quiet young woman they'd been politely tolerating. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the gathering, thank you for being here to celebrate Mom's birthday. I hope you'll excuse us while our family has some private conversations to catch up on. As people began gathering their belongings and saying their goodbyes, many of them approached me with obvious newfound respect. Olivia, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, I owe you an apology. I had no idea what you were building. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I understand why you made the assumptions you did. If you ever want to discuss potential partnerships between Thompson Holdings and Patterson Development, I'd be honored to explore opportunities. The offer was delivered with genuine respect. A recognition that I was now someone whose business judgment and financial resources commanded serious attention. Similar conversations happened with several other guests as they left, each of them clearly recalibrating their understanding of who I was and what I represented in our community's business landscape. When the terrace had finally cleared except for our family and the catering staff, Mom approached me with tears still in her eyes. Olivia, can you forgive me? There's nothing to forgive, Mom. You love me and you were worried about my future. Those are natural parental concerns. But I was so wrong about everything. About your work, your success, your contributions to our community. You weren't wrong to want me to be happy and secure. You were just wrong about what my happiness and security looked like. Richard joined us, his expression still showing signs of shock at what he'd learned. Olivia, I need to ask, why didn't you tell us? Why let us worry and offer advice when you were already more successful than either of us had ever imagined? I looked out over the city's financial district, visible from the club's terrace, where many of the companies I owned had their headquarters. Because I needed to know that you could love and respect me for who I was, not for what I'd achieved. I needed to know that our relationship wasn't conditional on meeting your expectations about marriage and social prominence. And now? Mom asked quietly. Now I know that you're capable of seeing me clearly when you have all the information. The question is whether you can continue seeing me clearly going forward, when the novelty of this revelation wears off and you're tempted to go back to offering advice about what I should do with my life. Both of them nodded solemnly. We want to support you properly, Richard said. Not by offering guidance you don't need, but by being parents who understand and appreciate what their daughter has accomplished. And we want to learn from you, Mom added. About business, about success, about building something meaningful rather than just maintaining social appearances. I looked at these two people who had worried about my future while I was secretly securing theirs, who had offered me career advice while I was creating thousands of jobs, who had hoped I would find traditional success while I was redefining what success could look like. There's a Thompson Holdings board meeting next month, I said finally. If you're interested in understanding what I really do for work, you're welcome to attend. Both of their faces lit up with genuine interest and pride. We'd be honored, Richard said. And Mom, I added, happy birthday. I'm sorry your celebration got derailed by business discussions. Are you kidding? She said, her tears now replaced by something that looked like wonder. Learning that my daughter is one of the most successful young investors in the country? It's the best birthday gift I've ever received. 6 months later, I was featured on the cover of Fortune magazine's 40 Under 40 issue. The article was titled, The Stealth Success: How Olivia Thompson Built an Investment Empire While Her Family Thought She Was Learning Personal Finance. It told the story of Thompson Holdings, of the innovative acquisition strategies that had made me one of the youngest successful institutional investors in the country, of the business philosophy that had turned analytical skills into job creation and regional economic development. But it also told the story of my family, of the assumptions they'd made and how those assumptions had been shattered at a birthday brunch that changed everything. It discussed the complexity of family relationships when success doesn't conform to traditional expectations, and the importance of understanding what people are really building before offering advice about their choices. The article included a photo of our family at the annual Thompson Holdings shareholder meeting, Mom, Richard, and I standing together in the conference room where billion-dollar investment decisions were made, all of us smiling genuinely as we discussed the company's expansion into international markets. The caption read, The Thompson Family Today, Building Success Together with Clear Understanding. It wasn't perfect. Relationships that had been built on false assumptions take time to rebuild on honest foundations. But it was real and it was based on truth instead of social expectations. And for the first time since I'd started Thompson Holdings, I felt like my family could see me for who I really was instead of who they'd hoped I would become. The daughter they'd thought was embarrassing the family name had been building wealth that supported the family's entire lifestyle. And now, finally, they could see the difference.